Everybody, this is Dream, and today we have a two-game college football slate that features West Virginia and Houston and SMU and ECU. These games are going to be somewhat interesting. Before I get started, can you guys smash that like and subscribe button? It really does help the channel a lot. I will give you the information about FanDuel as well, but I'm not going to show you FanDuel because this is more annoying on the video side of it. With that said, these two games, West Virginia is favored -2.5 against Houston, and SMU is favored -11.5 against SMU. I'm taking both of those spreads, -11.5 for SMU and -2.5 for West Virginia, in my bets. I also am picking the under for both games, so do keep that in mind for betting purposes. I also will showcase a couple other bets here in just a minute. Um, but let's go ahead and get into the slate for DraftKings here and FanDuel. So we're going to start with our quarterbacks here. And Green for West Virginia is overall the best option on the slate. He's also nice and cheap, which gives him an advantage on DraftKings. On FanDuel, all three quarterbacks that we're going to target today are the same price about. So there's really no benefit to going to Green there specifically. But here on DraftKings, there definitely is because he's $1,000 cheaper than Smith and he has some really nice upside. Now, he's not going to throw the ball as much, but he's going to run the ball more than the other quarterbacks, and so that gives him some advantage. Smith will run the ball as well, but he's been a little bit more inconsistent, and he's played more games than Green has. But I expect Green to have a big day, have a couple of touchdown opportunities, and he'll be borderline somebody that you could look at for a rushing touchdown, but he's not always going to get that touchdown, so do keep that in mind. But he is capable of it on the slate. Then we'll look at Smith, who is my second favorite quarterback. I do think he might end up scoring more fantasy points than Green, though he's fairly more expensive here on DraftKings. However, he definitely has some upside for running the ball as well. His floor is a little bit lower, but he's got the highest ceiling of all the quarterbacks on the slate. And I do think that he's probably going to have a pretty good day here for Houston, though he's probably going to have to throw the ball more throughout the game because they may get behind a little bit early. As for Stone for SMU, he's going to have a lot of good targets here. He's going to throw the ball a lot. He's not quite as consistent as the other two quarterbacks on the slate, but he is capable of having the best game. And so he's going to be a guy that's going to have some ownership in this slate as a contrarian option. And he's priced pretty fairly here on DraftKings. Like I said, on FanDuel, all three quarterbacks are the same price about. So you can really just like pick and choose. But if I was going to pick, I would say Green, then Smith, then Stone. So in that order. So moving on to the running backs here. We're going to start with our obvious pick here, which is going to be Donaldson for West Virginia. Now, he doesn't have as much upside as you'd think he would be, considering the fact he's the only guy that really has 100-yard potential today. His ceiling is much higher than anybody else. You know, he can get in the 20s in the fantasy points ranges, which I don't think any of the other running backs can do that. But his floor is also a little bit lower than we'd like for a traditional back, but he should be highly owned today. And he's not too expensive here on FanDuel or on DraftKings, excuse me, to where you can use him. Where he is one of the higher priced running backs. However, on FanDuel, however, you can use him on both sites, and he's probably the safest play. And he's definitely somebody that I'm looking at as a for a bet for a rushing touchdown. I think right now on DraftKings Sportsbook, he's got 0.5 rushing touchdowns, and he's definitely capable of that, as he's had 4 in the 5 games he's played so far this season. And I think he's in a good spot to do that again today, especially against a weak defense that he's facing on the slate. Then we're going to look at Knighton for SMU. Now, the concern here is that they have a bunch of running backs that are in timeshares, so do keep that in mind. And he is capable of a big game, but he's kind of up and down, so he's a little bit more of a boomer bust than I'd like, but he is a good price here on FanDuel. He's nice and cheap, and that gives him some upside as well. He's a lot more expensive on FanDuel, where he's the most expensive option one of the most expensive options of the guys that'll play. His teammate Wheaton is probably unlikely to play. He is currently questionable. If Wheaton were to play, that would definitely hurt Knighton a little bit, but I still think Knighton is going to be the lead back on this game regardless, so he's a viable option. And then we'll look at Mr. Harris from ECU. Now, he faces a tough matchup here, and I don't know that they're going to run the ball a ton, after as the game goes on because they're probably going to get down early. But he is definitely capable of scoring a touchdown. I think his range is in the 5 to 18 range today. Obviously, he has a little bit of upside, but it's a very tough defensive situation for him. And so while I do like his upside, he's going to be kind of a contrarian play on the slate, with Knighton and Donaldson both definitely being the top options. And then moving on to our wide receivers, we're going to start looking at each individual team here. And so from our wide receivers perspective for West Virginia, um, Clement is going to be the best option on this slate. He's hard to love on this one because all the running wide receivers for this team don't get a ton of catches. They kind of diversify the ball around, and they also just don't throw the ball that much, and so that does hurt them. West Virginia's wide receivers, they have good ceilings, but they have low floors, and so that is the concern. But Clement is the best option with the highest ceiling on the slate. I do think that he's going to be relatively under-owned because of the matchup, and so because they don't throw the ball that much. So if he could manage a touchdown, then he could probably pay off for you. But that's somewhat of a risk as he only has, well, he has 3 touchdowns on the season so far. I'm also going to mention Taylor, who's the tight end for West Virginia. Now, I don't think he's a great option on the slate, but he is capable of scoring a touchdown occasionally, and that gives him some utility here. But he's high risk, high reward, and I don't really expect him to have a whole lot of usage today, but he could be a contrarian kind of Hail Mary type of play to throw in there. Moving into Houston, this is really where we're going to find our running back, or sorry, our wide receivers, and I really like several guys here. Samuel Brown being the first one. He has some really good upside in this matchup. He's got the 33 catches on the season, which are most of anybody on the slate by a lot. Actually, he's got 34 according to ESPN. But regardless, he has only 1 touchdown on the season, which is a little bit of a surprise. He doesn't need to score a touchdown necessarily to pay off here. His floor is about as high as anybody on the slate, and he's got a pretty good ceiling. He doesn't have the highest ceiling, but he's very close, and he's going to have a lot of upside and a lot of ownership today. So his price is pretty good here. Comparing him on FanDuel, where he's actually the most expensive wide receiver, he'll be a little bit harder to roster there. But you can actually get some value plays from this team in the wide receiving aspect if you want to contrarian away from him. But I think he's a guy that you almost have to use on a slate like this. Then we'll look at Golden for Houston. Now, Golden is in a similar position where he's not got as much upside as his teammates, but he definitely has some potential. He's also going to be fairly highly owned today, and so I do think he's a viable option. And then Manjic, he's a little bit of a contrarian play today. He's somebody who I think is a little bit underutilized in the fantasy world. He looks like he's going to have a really good opportunity to have a pretty solid game, and the betting lines are actually really good for him for yards as well. He's something that I really like a lot. He's also nice and cheap here on FanDuel, or on DraftKings rather, at $5,800. He's not too bad on FanDuel either, though he is fairly expensive. I do think he can score anywhere from 8 to 18 fantasy points on the slate, maybe even a little bit more if he gets the right, if he can manage a touchdown. And so I think he's a viable option. He's going to have some pretty good ownership today, too, just because he's one of the cheaper options on this team, and I think he's a great option to utilize. Moving on to SMU, this team is a mess when it comes to wide receivers. They have a whole bunch of dudes that have, 7 to 10 catches on the season, and then they have a couple guys that have a couple more. We'll be focusing in on one particular, well, actually 2 different guys here. First one being RJ Maryland, who is their tight end. He gets a lot of upside in this slate as he has some nice potential. In fact, he's got as much potential as anybody on this slate because he can score touchdowns, and he does get a lot of targets. He might be a little bit under-owned today, too, so he's a great option, I think, on the slate because he's going to get the ball a lot, in my opinion. Then we'll look at, let's see here, Bailey for SMU. Now, he's got the most catches on the team, though he doesn't have a touchdown yet this season. He is definitely capable of a solid game here, and so he's somebody to consider, though he doesn't have as much potential from a touchdown perspective as he has none so far this year. But then Hudson, he's another guy I like quite a bit for this team. He's got as much upside as anybody on this. Well, no, not quite. He's got as much upside as anybody on this team, I should say, as he has some pretty good games. He's only had 2 touchdowns so far, but he definitely draws some potential today. He's got the highest ceiling of everybody not named Maryland, so I think he's somebody I would consider, but he definitely has some risk involved, and his ownership should be pretty low as well. Then we'll look at ECU for uh, this particular situation. I don't see a lot of guys I really like from ECU here. If I had to choose anyway, it would be anybody. It would be Jalen Johnson, but he definitely has some risk involved. But he's got the most catches on this team. However, he hasn't scored a touchdown yet this season, and he could score somewhere between 6 and 15 fantasy points. And he's dirt cheap, which definitely helps. As for FanDuel, the wide receiving aspects, obviously Houston's wide receivers, and then a mishmash of SMU wide receivers are probably the best way to go, with Maryland being the guy, though he's very expensive over on FanDuel, and so that is a concern as he's nice and dirt cheap here on DraftKings. So let's go ahead and get into my bets here, though. Let me pull this over here and show you this. So here's what I've got for bets on DraftKings FanBook. So I have the over/under on West Virginia, where I have them as under on the over/under, and also SMU being under on the over/under. I think West Virginia wins the game and covers the spread. Same with SMU and their game. As for player bets, I have CJ Donaldson being the anytime touchdown scorer, and I have CJ Donaldson scoring a over on the half of a touchdown. And then I also have Joseph Manjack at over 45.5 reception yards. I think that's way under what he's likely going to get. I have him somewhere around 60 to 70 yards on this slate, so I think that's a great option there. So with that said, guys, thank you for liking, commenting, subscribing. If you have any comments or questions, feel free to leave them below, and have a nice day, guys.